Claire, wait! Graham Whitmore's voice cut through the cool evening air, just as his housekeeper descended the marble steps of his Portland estate, shopping bags in both hands. She turned around, her wavy blonde hair catching the porch. Light? Yes, Mr. Whitmore. Did I forget something? Graham studied her face carefully, searching for signs of guilt. Those bags, what's in them? Claire's grip tightened. Groceries I picked up during lunch. You've been leaving early a lot. You said it was for family emergencies. My mother's been ill. I told you. Graham stepped closer. Yesterday I heard you on the phone. Oh. You said you needed more money? Claire's cheeks flushed. I don't understand what you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting. I'm telling you. I know something's going on. Silence hung between them. Claire stood her ground. If you don't trust me, Mr. Whitmore, maybe you should hire someone else. She turned and walked down the street, her footsteps sharp and steady. Graham stood motionless, jaw clenched. Inside his pristine mansion, Graham poured a scotch and stared at the Portland skyline. The house was a fortress by design, a defense against a world where money turned people into opportunists. His phone buzzed. Evan Blake, his assistant and only real friend. Any update on the background check for Claire? Graham asked. Clean. But you're being paranoid again. She's worked for you for 8 months without a single problem. Jennifer's background was clean too. She still stole my grandmother's heirlooms. That was 3 housekeepers and 2 girlfriends ago. You can't keep living like this. Graham ended the call and moved into his office. Security monitors showed empty hallways and perfectly arranged rooms. Everything was in place, controlled, precise, lifeless. He opened Claire's employment file. Claire Donovan, 29, references checked, identity verified. But something still didn't add up. The phone call in Spanish, Madre Dinero, urgent, and the $500 receipt for a wire transfer to Honduras, hidden in her coat pocket. When he'd asked, she stammered and changed the subject. He reviewed security footage from the past week. Claire showed up at 8, worked without distraction, but during her lunch breaks, she spent time on expensive jewelry websites, diamond earrings, tennis bracelets, all far beyond her paycheck. Graham's instincts flared. It was the same pattern he'd seen before: small irregularities, then the big betrayals. A text popped up. Working late tonight? Don't wait up, Claire. But he hadn't scheduled her for the evening. Another lie. He grabbed his keys, headed for the garage, and got into his car. Tonight he would follow her and find out the truth. The night air was crisp as Graham Whitmore merged into Portland traffic, trailing the number 47 bus from 3 cars behind. He had followed this routine before, just to ensure Claire got home safely, but tonight was different. Wasn't checking on her safety, was chasing the truth. He told himself this was about protecting his assets, learning from past mistakes, being smart rather than naive. But as he spotted Claire's blonde braid through the window and watched her clutch the same grocery bags from earlier, he wasn't sure if he was trying to catch a thief or prove to himself that he hadn't completely lost his mind. The bus rolled to a stop in the heart of Portland's Old Town district. Claire stepped off, still holding the bags, and headed down a dimly lit street lined with aging storefronts and graffiti-tagged windows. Graham parked across the street and followed on foot, sticking to the shadows. Claire walked with purpose, her pace steady, her back straight. She stopped in front of a rundown building with faded signage above the door. Hope Bridge Community Center. Graham's pulse quickened. This was it. He was about to find out what she was really doing after. Work. Claire pushed through the glass doors and disappeared inside. Graham moved closer and peeked through one of the tall windows. The interior was dated but clean. Folding chairs were set up in rows. A dry race board stood at the front of the room. He saw Claire set her bags down and hug an elderly woman who greeted her with a warm smile. Then Claire walked to the front of the room and faced a group of 20 or so older adults, men and women, holding notebooks and pencils. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice clear and full of energy. "Tonight, we're going to practice ordering food at restaurants." Graham blinked. Teaching. She was teaching English for the next hour. Stood in the dark, watching her lead the class with patience and passion. When an older man struggled to pronounce a word, Claire knelt beside him and gently corrected him. When a woman hesitated with a sentence, Claire squeezed her shoulder and encouraged her in Spanish. Her face glowed, animated and joyful, so different from the quiet, careful housekeeper he saw at home after the lesson. Claire opened her grocery bags and began assembling paper plates with sandwiches, fruit, and crackers. She handed them out, with a smile, chatting in both English and Spanish as her students sat and ate. No fanfare, no recognition, just quiet care. Graham stepped back from the window, stunned. The $500 wire transfer, the early departures, the phone call about needing more money. It all made sense now, but not in the way he had expected. This wasn't theft. It was sacrifice. She was working extra jobs so she could volunteer every night and even feed the people she served. He drove home in silence, smile seared into his memory. Back in his office, he pulled up the Hope Bridge Community Center's website. It was a nonprofit serving immigrants and low-income families in the city, offering English classes, legal assistance, job training, and childcare. Everything was donation-based. Everything was volunteer-run. Photos of Claire filled the site. Claire leading English lessons, Claire organizing food drives, Claire reading books to children. In every image, she radiated purpose. He scanned the financial reports. The center was struggling, month to month. They were facing budget cuts and repairs they couldn't afford. And still, Claire showed up every night, teaching and giving from her own pocket. His phone rang. It was Evan. Again. "Find anything interesting on your spy mission?" Yvonne asked. Graham rubbed his eyes, slumped in his chair. "I'm an idiot." "What happened?" "She's not stealing from me. She's actually good. Claire, she's good." "What about the money she wired? The stuff you saw her buying online?" "The money's for her mother's medical treatment. She volunteers at a community center every evening. She was probably just dreaming, scrolling through jewelry she'll never afford." There was silence on the line, then Evan's voice came through, softer now. "When's the last time you met someone genuinely good?" Graham stared at the photos on his monitor. Claire helping a little girl hold a pencil. Claire laughing with a table full of students. He didn't answer Evan's question. Didn't need to. The next morning, Graham Whitmore found himself pacing the kitchen, glancing at the clock more often than necessary. He timed his coffee break to perfectly align with Claire's usual arrival. When she walked in, her blonde braid tucked neatly over her shoulder and her posture alert, she paused at the sight of him casually sipping from his mug. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. I'll stay out of your way." "Chilly, Claire," he said, setting his mug down and pulling out a stool at the kitchen island. "I was hoping you'd join me." She froze, a dish towel still in her hand. "For what?" "To tell me about your evening classes," he replied, meeting her eyes directly. Her face went pale. "I don't know what you mean." "I followed you last night," Graham said, evenly. Claire sat down slowly, tension etched into her face. "Are you going to fire me?" "Fire you? Why would I do that?" "'Cause I lied about working late. 'Cause I used my lunch break to buy food for the center instead of taking a real break. Because I've been distracted thinking about my students when I should be focused on my job here." Graham looked at her, the honesty in her voice softening the walls around him. "Tell me about them, your students." She hesitated, then finally said, "Most of them are older. Some have lived here for decades, but never learned English properly. Maria is 73 and just wants to be able to talk to her doctor without her granddaughter translating. Carlos worked construction for 40 years but can't read safety signs. They're proud people. They just need a chance." She spoke. Graham saw a different version of the woman, who cleaned his bookshelves and folded his towels. Her voice became animated. Her hands gestured passionately. The quiet, obedient housekeeper disappeared, replaced by someone driven by purpose and compassion. "The center might close," she continued. "We can barely pay rent. I try to help with supplies when I can, but it's not enough." That afternoon, Graham made a decision. He logged into a private account, routed through a shell corporation, and made an anonymous donation to the Hope Bridge Community Center. $50,000, enough to cover their rent, supplies, and repairs for several months. enough to keep the lights on without anyone knowing he had anything to do with it. He clicked submit and sat back in his chair. For the first time in years, his money felt like it meant something. The next morning, Claire practically burst through the kitchen door. "Someone donated $50,000 to the center," she said, her voice bursting with disbelief. Her eyes sparkled. "Can you believe it? The center is saved?" Graham looked up from his coffee, carefully masking the flicker of emotion that passed through him. "That's amazing news. Do you know who it was?" "No idea. It was anonymous. But they left a note saying they believed in our mission." She began unpacking her cleaning supplies with more energy than he'd ever seen. "We can fix the heater, buy textbooks. Maybe even launch a computer literacy class," Maria cried when I told her. Graham watched her move through the room, radiant with hope, and felt something warm build in his chest. When was the last time he'd made someone feel this happy? Over the following weeks, he found himself inventing excuses to be around while Claire worked. He suddenly had urgent emails to send from the kitchen whenever she was prepping lunch. He conveniently needed coffee right as she was dusting the living room. Their conversations stretched longer with each day. Claire spoke about her college thesis on economic inequality and her dream of becoming a social worker. She shared stories of Honduras, her childhood, the longing she carried for home. Graham, in turn, offered pieces of himself carefully details. Of his business, of cities he had visited, of the crushing loneliness he often felt in his silent house. One afternoon, as Claire arranged a bouquet of wildflowers in a vase for the dining room table, she asked, "Don't you have family?" "My parents died when I was 22. Car accident." Claire's hands paused on the petals. "I'm sorry. That must have been awful." "It was. But it taught me to be self-reliant," he said, then added with quiet hesitation, "Maybe too self-reliant." Claire glanced up. "Family isn't just blood," she said. "At the center, we're all family. Mrs. Thompson brings soup for everyone. Mr. Delgado fixes things around the building just because he can. We take care of each other." Graham envied that. His world was polished and profitable, but sterile. Even Evan, his closest confidant, was technically on his payroll. Claire belonged to something real, something he'd never had. In December, Graham made another anonymous donation. It's time for computer equipment, the same lab Claire had mentioned wanting to build. He watched the news coverage of the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Claire stood beaming with pride, her voice clear and full of joy. He turned off the screen but couldn't stop thinking about how she glowed. "You seem different lately," Evan said during one of their regular meetings. "Happier, do I? You're smiling more. You haven't ordered a background check in over a month." Graham deflected with talk of quarterly reports, but Evan was right. The constant suspicion that ruled his life was loosening. Claire's presence had done something no amount of security systems ever could have made him feel human again. It was early January when Graham walked into his kitchen one morning and found Claire already there, sitting at the table, surrounded by open textbooks, research papers, and color-coded notes. She looked up, startled. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitmore. I came in early to make up some hours. I have a thesis meeting later." Graham poured coffee and slid into the seat across from her. "What's your thesis about?" Claire blinked, caught off guard by his interest. Barriers to social mobility in immigrant communities. "I'm researching how access to language programs, job training, and community support systems can help break cycles of poverty." For the next hour, she spoke with the same passion he had seen at the community center. She talked about broken systems, about parents working 3 jobs who still couldn't afford rent, about talented professionals whose foreign degrees were deemed worthless. "Most people don't see it," she said. "They look at someone mopping floors or serving tables and assume that's all they're capable of. But Carlos was an engineer in El Salvador. Isabella ran a bakery. They're brilliant people reduced to survival jobs because their credentials don't transfer." Graham felt a twist of guilt, remembering how he'd once assumed Claire was a thief. "I want to change that," she continued. "Create programs that acknowledge people's real skills, help them grow instead of forcing them to start from nothing." "That's incredible work," he said, genuinely impressed. She blushed. "It's just research. Probably won't go anywhere." "Don't say that. You're already changing lives at the center." Their eyes locked across the table, and something shifted. Claire looked away first, hurriedly gathering her papers. I should get to work. That afternoon, Graham made a decision. He found her in the living room, organizing books, and said, "Claire, I'd like to offer you a full-time position, a better salary, health benefits, paid vacation. You'd manage the house, coordinate with the other staff, maybe even help manage my calendar." Claire looked stunned. "That's generous. But I don't understand. You barely trusted me to dust your furniture a few months ago. I trust you now," he said. "You're smart, reliable, and you care about what you do. The salary would help with your mother's treatment, and you could stop juggling 3 jobs, maybe even have time to finish your degree." She bit her lip. "Can I think about it?" Of course, Graham said, but he could already see the storm in her eyes. He knew that offering her more money might mean taking her away from the center, away from what lit her up inside. A week later, Claire stepped into his office, holding a notebook to her chest. "I've decided about the job." Graham closed his laptop and gave her his full attention, his heart pounding. "Grateful, Mr. Whitmore, really, but I can't accept. Why not?" She inhaled deeply. "'Cause it would mean living someone else's dream instead of my own. The center needs me. My studies matter to me, and honestly." She met his eyes, her voice softer. "I've fallen in love with someone impossible. Taking this job would make me feel like I'm betraying that feeling." Graham froze, every part of him suddenly alert. "Someone impossible? Someone who represents everything I want to do with my life. Someone who makes me want to be better. But our worlds are too different. It could never work." His chest tightened as the realization sank in. She wasn't talking about a job offer. She was talking about someone she loved. "I should go," Claire said quickly. "This is too personal. I'm sorry." Before Graham could speak, she walked out, leaving him alone at his desk, stunned. She was in love with someone else, someone who inspired her, someone she believed in, someone who wasn't him. Graham Whitmore spent the weekend in his office, staring at spreadsheets he couldn't process. His mind kept circling back to Claire's words. She had fallen in love with someone impossible. She hadn't named him, but he was certain now it wasn't him. It had to be someone from the center, someone young and passionate like her, someone who belonged to the same world she was fighting for. Probably another volunteer or a professor. Someone who had seen her brilliance from the beginning and never doubted her intentions. On Monday morning, Claire arrived as usual, punctual and composed, but something had changed. The warmth that had grown between them over the past months was gone, replaced by careful professionalism. Graham didn't look up from his paper when she entered the room. Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," she replied. Her voice was polite but distant. The week dragged on, every interaction measured and empty. Graham buried himself in work, taking his meals alone, keeping his door shut. Claire moved through the house like a ghost, efficient and silent, doing her job and leaving without another word. On Friday afternoon, she knocked on the frame of his office door. "Mr. Whitmore, I need to give you my notice." He looked up slowly. "Your notice?" 2 weeks, she said. "I'm sorry for the short notice, but I've been accepted into a graduate program for social work. My practicum begins in March, and I need time to prepare." Graham nodded, forcing his voice to remain even. "Congratulations. Impressive achievement." "Thank you," Claire replied, holding her cleaning supplies in front of her like a shield. "I'll make sure everything is perfect before I go. I can help train my replacement if you'd like." "That won't be necessary." As the silence stretched between them, too heavy to fill with anything else. Finally, Claire turned and walked away. "Claire," he said before she reached the door. She paused. "I'm proud of you. What you're doing, it matters." Her shoulders dropped slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. That means more than you know." The following 2 weeks were agony. Graham found himself memorizing her routines, the way she opened the curtains, how she arranged the flowers in the hallway, the quiet way she hummed while organizing his library. Every day brought him closer to losing her entirely. He helped her prepare for interviews, writing glowing recommendation letters that read like love letters he would never dare to send. Midweek, he received a call from the Seattle Community Services office. They wanted to schedule a second interview. For Claire, they're impressed, he told her casually as she vacuumed the foyer. Her face lit up. Really? That's my dream job, working directly with immigrant families, helping them navigate resources and systems. Perfect for it, he said. And he meant it. Even though each word felt like another crack in the wall he'd carefully rebuilt around his heart. On Thursday evening, Claire stayed late, organizing the household records before she left for good. Graham brought her coffee and found her sitting at the kitchen table, eyes rimmed with tears. What's wrong? She quickly wiped at her face. Nothing, just tired. Claire. It's stupid, she said, her voice trembling. I'm leaving to pursue what I've always wanted. It's what I worked for, but I'm going to miss this. Our talks, feeling like someone actually cares about what I do. Graham sat across from her. Someone does care. Someone always will. Their eyes met across the table, and for a brief second, he considered telling her everything, how he had followed her that night. How he had made the donations, how she had completely transformed the way he saw the world. How he had fallen in love with her without even realizing it at first. Instead, he said, that person you mentioned, the one you love, have you told him? Claire shook her head. What's the point? We're from different worlds. He'd never see me as anything more than... She stopped herself, then continued, than what I am. Someone who cleans houses? He asked. Someone who comes from nothing? She gave a sad smile. You're kind to say it differently, but yes. Friday arrived far too soon. Claire finished her final tasks with mechanical precision and packed her things in a small duffel bag. Graham handed her an envelope containing her final paycheck and a large bonus, enough to cover her mother's medical expenses for an entire year. This is too much, she said, staring at the figure on the check. You've been invaluable. Consider it a graduation gift. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep in touch, let me know how things go. Of course, she said softly. They stood in the foyer, neither willing to say goodbye. Finally, Claire stepped forward and hugged him, just for a moment. Thank you for everything, Mr. Whitmore. You've been more than an employer. You've been a friend. After she left, Graham walked through his quiet home. Everything was clean, folded, organized, and empty. The walls that had once made him feel safe now made him feel alone. He had returned to his fortress, but now it felt more like a prison. Over the next 3 months, Graham Whitmore slipped back into old patterns. He hired a new housekeeper named Janet, efficient, quiet, and uninterested in conversation. She arrived, cleaned, left, and never lingered. The house ran like clockwork again. But it felt like a machine, cold, mechanical, silent. He buried himself. In work, closed deals, increased profits, and checked off achievements that once gave him satisfaction but now felt hollow. His phone was filled with notifications, meetings, updates, but none of it mattered. He couldn't stop thinking about Claire. He kept donating to the Hope Bridge Community Center, always anonymously. He watched from afar as their programs expanded, and new services were launched. Through Evan's quiet network of contacts, he learned Claire had been hired by Seattle Community Services as a full-time social worker specializing in immigrant family support. Her thesis had been completed with honors. She'd moved to a safer apartment and had brought her mother to Portland for an extended visit. She's doing well, Evan said one afternoon, over lunch at their usual steakhouse. By all accounts, she loves her new job. Graham replied, stirring his drink slowly. That's what she wanted. Evan watched him carefully. What about what you want? Graham didn't answer. He pushed his food around his plate. She's not married, Evan added, casually. Still single. Evan, Graham said quietly. I'm just saying. Evan shrugged. Maybe the impossible isn't as impossible as you think. Graham didn't respond because he did know. Claire had found her path. She was finally surrounded by people who shared her values, her fire, her compassion. She didn't need a suspicious, emotionally stunted millionaire disrupting that new life. Still, when an envelope arrived, one spring morning, A formal invitation to the Hope Bridge Community Center's annual fundraising. Gallahee stared at it for a long time. Claire was going to be honored that night, the invite said, for her outstanding service and leadership. She would be receiving a community award. Graham set the envelope down, walked away, then came back and read it again. Against his better judgment, he RSVP'd. Yes, he told himself he just wanted to see her success, witness her happiness from a distance. But in the quiet part of his mind, he knew he was hoping for something more, a chance to see if the connection they had shared had been real or just another illusion. On the evening of the gala, Graham stood in his walk-in closet, staring at rows of designer suits. He had changed his mind about attending at least 6 times that week. "You're overthinking it," Evan said from the doorway. "It's a charity event. You go, you write a check, you clap politely, and you leave. What if she thinks I'm stalking her? What if she's happy to see you?" Graham picked a navy suit and slid it off the hanger. "She's moved on, Evan. New job, new life. I'm ancient history. You won't know unless you show up." Across the city, Claire stood in the bathroom of her small apartment, applying lipstick with trembling hands. She wore a sleek black dress that fit perfectly but felt surreal. 6 months ago, she was rushing between cleaning jobs and community center shifts. Now she was being honored in front of donors, board members, and city leaders. "You look beautiful." "Honey," her mother, Linda Donovan, said from the doorway. Linda had arrived from Honduras 10 weeks ago, finally well enough to travel after surgery. "I'm nervous, Mom." Claire adjusted her necklace, but couldn't shake the thought. "I keep thinking about him. It's ridiculous. I know. Why would someone like him show up at something like this?" "Tell me again about this man you worked for," her mother said with a soft smile. "You always glowed when you spoke about him." "He was kind, in his own way. He listened. He made me feel like my dreams mattered, and you loved him." Claire looked up in the mirror and saw her mother's knowing eyes. "Doesn't matter. We're from different worlds." "Love doesn't care about worlds, baby," Linda said gently. At the Hope Bridge Community Center, the space had been transformed. String lights draped from the ceiling, white linens dressed the tables, and a small stage stood at the front of the main hall. Claire arrived early to help with the last-minute setup. "There's our star," called Maria, one of her original English students, now a volunteer translator. "I can't believe they're giving me an award," Claire said, fixing a centerpiece. "You saved this place," said Carlos, the former engineer who now ran the computer lab. "That anonymous donation came right after you started working here full-time. Coincidence? Don't think so." Claire had wondered the same thing. The timing of the donations had always felt uncanny, but she had never found out who was behind them. By 6 o'clock, the guests began arriving. Claire floated between conversations, greeting families, laughing with former students. The room was filled with the sound of music, multiple languages, and shared joy. At 7:30, she was greeting a family near the entrance when she saw him. Graham stood in the doorway, looking effortlessly elegant in a tailored navy suit. He glanced around the room, clearly feeling out of place. Their eyes met across the space, and Claire's breath caught. He was here, actually here. Graham felt his heart pound as their gazes locked. Claire looked stunning, confident, graceful, glowing. This was her world now, full of hope, unity, purpose. And he was the outsider, Mr. Whitmore. An older man approached, extending a hand. "Carlos Mendez. Claire told us about you. Said you were a good employer, very supportive." Graham forced a smile. "She did, of course. She spoke of you often." Before Graham could say more, the program began. Claire was called to the stage. The room quieted as she stepped up and accepted the crystal plaque. "This community saved me," she began, her voice steady. "When I first came to this country, I felt invisible. Here I learned that everyone has something to give. Everyone has value. And to the anonymous donor who believed in USU, showed us that kindness can come from unexpected places. Sometimes angels appear when we least expect them." Graham's hands clenched in his lap. She still didn't know. He'd watched her become everything she'd dreamed of, and she still had no idea who had helped her get there. He wasn't sure if that made him feel proud or cowardly. After the ceremony, Graham stayed in his corner, watching Claire move through the crowd like a rising star. She smiled, hugged, thanked people, and more than once she looked in his direction. As the evening wound down, Claire finally approached the corner where Graham stood. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, the award still in her hand, her steps unsure. "Mr. Whitmore, I can't believe you're here." Graham straightened, slipping his hands into his pockets. "Congratulations on your award. You deserve it." "Thank you," Claire said softly, eyes searching his. "I didn't think charity galas were really your thing." "They're not," he admitted. But this cause seemed worth supporting. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then smiled. "It's my mom." She answered and immediately switched to Spanish, speaking quickly and excitedly. Graham waited while she walked a few steps away, nodding. Through the call, when she returned, she was beaming. "Good news?" he asked. "The best? Her cancer is officially in remission. The doctor said she's completely healthy." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "She's been staying with me since her surgery. I've been so scared. Oh, but now—" She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "She's going to be okay." Graham swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. "Really glad to hear that." "An anonymous donor helped cover her treatment," Claire said, shaking her head. In disbelief, "I've tried to figure out who it was, but no one will say. If I ever find out, I don't even know what I'd say to them." "Claire," Graham started, voice low. "There's something I need to tell you." She tilted her head slightly. "What is it?" He drew a breath, steadying himself. "The anonymous donor. It was me." Claire blinked, confused. "What?" "The donation that saved the center. The one for the computers, the money for your mother's treatment. It was all me." She stared at him, the plaque in her hands trembling slightly. "But how? How did you even know?" Her eyes widened. "You followed me?" Graham nodded, guilt washing over him. "That night you left early. I thought you were lying to me. I was sure you were stealing. I followed you and saw you. Teaching, I realized how wrong I'd been." Claire slowly sat in a nearby chair, trying to process. "You've been watching my life? Guiding it? Changing it without telling me?" "Oh," Graham said, stepping closer. "Claire, I wasn't trying to control anything. First, I was ashamed of how it started. Then later, I was afraid. You'd refuse the help if you knew it came from me." "Of course I would have refused," she said, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea how it feels to find out your independence? Your family's health? Your community's survival, all of it was just part of some wealthy man's private mission?" "It wasn't charity," Graham said, desperate now. "It was never about pity. It was about you. Watching you that night changed everything. I saw how selfless you were. How much you gave even when you had nothing to spare. I saw what real strength looked like." Claire stood pacing. "And what was I to you? A noble cause, a lesson in humility." "No," Graham said quietly. "You were the first person I trusted in over 15 years. You were kindness. You were everything I stopped believing existed. You were the person I fell in love with." She stopped moving, her breath caught. Don't say that. It's true." "You think I don't know you love someone else?" she asked, eyes full. "Someone impossible, who inspires you to do more good in the world. I know I'm not that person." "You are," he said, stepping forward. "You've been that person all along, the one I thought could never love me back." Claire's eyes searched his, disbelief giving way to realization. "You really don't understand, do you?" "Understand what?" he asked. Her voice softened. "You are the impossible one. The man I fell in love with. It's the one who listened to my dreams and made me feel like I mattered." Graham froze. "I thought you were talking about someone else." "I tried to convince myself it could never be you," she said, "because of the way we met, because of our differences. But it was always you." They stood facing each other in the quiet corner of the nearly empty community center. Years of misunderstanding unraveled in a single moment. "I followed you because I was paranoid," Graham said. "But I fell in love with you because you reminded me what purpose looks like. I thought you saw me as nothing more than someone who cleaned your house," Claire whispered. "Oh, I saw you," he said. "As everything good I thought the world had lost." "Oh." She stepped forward and touched his face, her hand trembling. "We're both idiots." Graham laughed, the sound rough but genuine. Completely. So what do we do now? I want to ask you something, he said, taking her hands. And I need you to think carefully before you answer. She nodded. I don't just want to date you, Claire. I want to build a life. With you, a real partnership. I want to use my resources, money, time, connections, not to rescue, but to empower. I want to support your mission, your work, your vision. You're equal. Her eyes widened. Graham, I've learned that money only matters when it's used to lift others. You taught me that. But I want to learn more. You love with you, fight the hard battles with you. Claire smiled through tears. You want to be my partner in crime? In fighting injustice, yes, he said, but also in life. She stood on tiptoe and kissed him, soft and certain. When they pulled apart, she whispered, There's one more thing. What? My mom wants to meet you. Graham smiled. Should I be nervous? Terrified, she said, laughing. She's already decided you're too skinny and need feeding. They walked out of the building hand in hand. Behind them, the photos on the walls showed immigrants. Learning English, families graduating from citizenship classes, children drawing pictures of their dreams. The same place that had brought them together would now be part of their future. Ready to change the world, Mr. Whitmore? Claire asked. With you, he said. I'm ready for anything. 1 year later, in August of 2026, the Hope Bridge Community Center had never looked more radiant. The main hall had been transformed into a wedding venue unlike any other. White roses and baby's breath lined every table. Strings of soft lights crisscrossed the ceiling, casting a warm glow that turned the community space into something almost magical. In a small dressing room near the back of the building, Claire stood quietly in front of a mirror, adjusting the lace sleeves of her grandmother's vintage wedding dress. You ready, sweetheart? Her mother asked, stepping up behind her with a small, proud smile. More than ready, Mom. Linda Donovan had been living in Portland for nearly 10 months now. Her health had fully returned, and her English had improved remarkably thanks, in part to her future son-in-law's patient tutoring over weekend dinners. The first time she met Graham, she declared him too serious, too thin, and entirely in need of a real home-cooked meal. Within the first hour, she had pulled out her recipe box and begun showing him how to make tamales from scratch. He's a good man, Linda said, adjusting Claire's veil with steady hands. Not what I expected, but a good one. Claire smiled at the memory of that first dinner. Graham, arriving with white lilies and nerves, sitting stiffly at her tiny kitchen table while her mother interrogated him in rapid Spanish. By dessert, Linda was teaching him how to fold pastry dough while swapping embarrassing childhood stories about Claire. The wedding march began playing in the next room. Claire stepped into the hallway, her heart pounding but steady, guests-filled. Every satanic eclectic mix of tech executives, nonprofit leaders, Claire's former English students, volunteers from the center, and family members from both sides. At the end of the aisle, beneath the same string lights, where she once taught her first English class, Graham waited in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. His eyes locked on hers with an expression that told her he was still in awe that she'd said yes. Beside him stood Evan, his best man, who had grown into a friend not only to Graham but also to Claire. Evan now attended their community events, often volunteering his business expertise to help with grant proposals and digital outreach. Father O'Connell, the same priest who had married half the neighborhood's families, stood between them, hands folded and eyes warm. Dearly beloved, he began, we gather today to witness the union of two souls who, through grace, patience, and love, have found in each other not just a partner, but a purpose. Claire and Graham had written their own vows. When Graham began his voice rang clear and strong. Claire, you taught me that wealth isn't about what we accumulate, but about the lives we impact. You showed me that trust isn't weakness, the foundation of everything that matters. You made me believe again in love that heals, love that changes. I promise to be your partner in all things, in joy, in hardship, and in the work of building a kinder, more just world. Claire took a deep breath before speaking. Graham, you taught me that assumptions can blind us to unexpected blessings. You showed me that vulnerability is not something to be ashamed of, but something to share. You made me believe that two people from opposite ends of the world can come together and create something better. I promise to be your partner in every challenge, in every triumph, and in every step we take to serve something greater than ourselves." When Father O'Connell declared them husband and wife, the entire hall erupted in cheers. Maria, the 70-something translator, tossed rice in defiance of the no rice sign. The children from the after-school program ran forward with handmade cards that read, "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore." Laughter and music filled the room. Claire and Graham moved among the guests, hand in hand, receiving hugs, congratulations, and a few emotional tears. Their nonprofit, the Donovan Whitmore Foundation, had launched 3 months earlier. It focused on immigrant services, educational access, and sustainable community development. Claire served as executive director, managing staff, programs, and community outreach. Graham handled strategy, funding, and corporate partnerships. Together, they had built something that was no longer just hers, or his IT was theirs, as they swayed during their first dance. Claire leaned in and whispered, "Remember when you thought I was stealing from you?" Graham grinned. "Remember when you thought I'd never see you as anything more than a housekeeper?" They laughed and spun slowly across the floor. Around them, Evan danced with Linda, who had unofficially appointed herself his Spanish tutor. Carlos twirled his granddaughter near the dessert table. Maria was caught sneaking an extra slice of cake into her handbag. Later in the evening, Claire found herself standing near the hallway that led to the classroom, where it had all begun. Where she had taught English that night, Graham followed her. The door was open now, revealing a small bronze plaque on the wall. The Claire Donovan Whitmore Learning Center, where every voice matters. "Any regrets?" Graham asked, stepping behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Claire leaned back against his chest. "Only one," she whispered. "What's that?" "That it took us so long to realize we were already building something together?" Graham kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, mingled with the smell of coffee and the faint trace of her mother's cooking that seemed to live in everything they touched. "We found each other when we were ready," he said. "That's all that matters." Outside, the Portland skyline sparkled in the distance. The same city where a guarded millionaire had once followed his maid into the unknown. The same city where he had discovered that the greatest treasure wasn't money, but a woman who had always been standing in the light, just waiting for him to open his eyes. The next morning, Claire and Graham boarded a flight to Honduras for their honeymoon. Claire's extended family, most of whom had never met Graham in person, had been sending hand-knitted scarves, embroidered kitchen towels, and spice blends for months in anticipation of his arrival. When they landed, the welcome was overwhelming. Cousins, uncles, aunts, and old neighbors crowded the tiny airport exit, holding handmade signs and waving miniature American and Honduran flags. Graham had never been around such a loud, warm, curious group. By the time they arrived at the family house, his shirt was stained with food samples, his hair tousled from affectionate ruffling, and his arms full of gifts he didn't understand but was told were essential. That evening, he sat in a hammock, with Claire's little cousins piled around him, listening as her grandmother told a story about Claire trying to run a backyard clinic for stray dogs when she was 8. Claire translated between giggles, and Graham couldn't remember the last time he had felt so unguarded. They spent 2 weeks immersed in family meals, sunrise walks, and long conversations under mango trees. When they returned to Portland, it was with a renewed sense of purpose. They threw themselves into the work of the Donovan Whitmore Foundation. Graham used his business contacts to build partnerships with local tech companies, convincing them to fund scholarships, mentorship programs, and job placements for immigrants. Claire designed pilot programs that focused on financial literacy, language learning, and professional accreditation. They held monthly community nights at Hope Bridge, where families could attend free legal clinics, health screenings, and resume workshops. Graham gave speeches, awkward at first, but honest and increasingly confident. Claire ran the events like clockwork, her clipboard always in hand, her heart always in the room. Their mission became their rhythm. On Monday mornings, they reviewed grant reports over breakfast. On Fridays, they visited local shelters and school programs. Saturday afternoons were for planning community cookouts, where Graham inevitably ended up chopping onions while Claire danced barefoot with kids on the blacktop. The foundation quickly became known not just for its funding but for its founders. They were present, accessible, passionate. Claire was invited to speak at city council forums and policy summits. Graham received recognition for integrating nonprofit advocacy into business strategy. But awards and attention never distracted them. Their focus was always the people they served, despite the joy. They had moments of tension, clashing management styles, differing approaches to communication, and the occasional flare-up over burned dinner or overbooked schedules. But each disagreement was met with patience and perspective. They had both lived too long in separate worlds to forget how precious their shared one was now. On their first wedding anniversary, they returned to the community center where they had married. The walls were covered in photos from the past year's students, graduating from English classes, families moving into permanent housing, children holding certificates from tech camps. Claire and Graham walked through the hall slowly, hand in hand, remembering every name. Every story. In the corner near the plaque bearing Claire's name, they found a handwritten card taped to the wall. It read, "Thank you for seeing us. You for standing with us." Signed simply, Anna and Louise. Graham took a picture of it and saved it to his phone, quietly adding it to a growing album titled Why We Do This. That night, they sat on the couch in their modest home, tired but content. Claire rested her head on Graham's shoulder. "Remember when we thought we had nothing in common?" she murmured. "We still don't," he replied with a smile. "You're all heart. I'm all spreadsheets." "But we fit," she said. "Perfectly," he agreed. Outside, the porch light glowed gently over the front steps. In the distance, the city stretched out in lights and stories and futures still unfolding. And inside that home, two people who had once existed incompletely. Separate realities had created one future, one mission, one life. Autumn came early in Portland, painting the trees outside the Hope Bridge Community Center in shades of amber and gold. Inside, the buzz of activity never slowed. Students practiced English phrases. Volunteers sorted donations, and children gathered around laptops in the new computer lab. It was exactly the kind of space Claire had dreamed of years ago, when she was still cleaning houses to make ends meet. She stood in the doorway of her old classroom, now fully renovated and renamed the Claire Donovan Whitmore Learning Center. She smiled at the sight of 3 new volunteers setting up chairs for that evening's adult literacy class. From behind, Graham wrapped his arms around her waist. "It still amazes me," he said softly. "How much can change in a year?" Claire leaned back into him. "And how much still needs changing?" They had just finished a foundation board meeting upstairs, where they approved funding for 2 new community partnerships, one for refugee housing and another for small business microloans. Graham had chaired the meeting with the ease of a man who now understood that true leadership wasn't about control, but connection. Later that evening, they hosted a community dinner. Linda was in the kitchen, managing the volunteer cooks with military precision. Evan handed out grant flyers with the confidence of a man who had finally found a cause he believed in. Carlos manned the check-in table, proudly announcing he'd started taking night classes at the community college thanks to a scholarship the foundation launched. Graham gave a short toast near the dessert table. "1 year ago, I stood in this room not knowing whether I belonged. Today, I know I do because of all of you. This place changed my life, and the woman who built it changed my heart." Claire's eyes sparkled as she watched the applause ripple through the crowd as the evening wound down. Claire and Graham walked through the center one last time, turning off lights and locking doors. In the hallway lined with community photos, Claire stopped in front of the same window Graham had once peered through when he followed her that first night. "You know," she said, "I used to think I had to choose between my purpose and love, that it wasn't possible to have both." Graham turned toward her, his expression warm. "And now I know the right person doesn't stand in the way of your dreams. They help you build them." They stepped outside into the cool night. The city lights sparkled across the skyline. Claire slipped her hand into Graham's as they stood at the top of the steps, taking in the view. "We've built something good," she said. "Something real. We're just getting started," Graham replied. The next day, the foundation launched a new campaign focused on mentorship for first-generation college students. Graham and Claire spent the morning filming a short video hymn awkward on camera, her effortless. They visited 2 schools that afternoon, greeted by students who knew Claire by name and who greeted Graham like a legend they'd only heard stories about. That evening, they returned home, exhausted and fulfilled. Graham found a handwritten letter on their doorstep. It was from a former student who had just passed her U.S. citizenship test. "Thank you for teaching me that my voice matters," it read. Claire folded it gently and slid it into the keepsake box they kept in the hallway, drawer next to the photo of them under the string lights on their wedding day, the printout of Graham's first anonymous donation confirmation. Their love had started in suspicion, bloomed through service, and grew into a life rooted in something larger than themselves. In each other, they had found not just healing, but hope. Not just companionship, but mission. The mansion Graham once called a fortress had been sold months ago. They now lived in a modest 2-story home close to the center, where neighborhood kids knocked on their door for help with homework, and community leaders often stayed for coffee. The house was loud, lived in, and open. The kind of place where everyone belonged, and every time someone asked how they met, Claire would smile and say it's a long story, one that started when a lonely millionaire followed his maid after work and discovered the greatest treasure he'd ever find had been standing right in front of him all along.